Okay, calm down.
Susan, what made you get involved in this coalition, this campaign?
Well, I don't think I would have even known about it if it hadn't been for Nina Turner calling me, which goes to show how desperately they need to make this an issue, bring it to the public, because this has been going on every time the minimum wage was voted upon. This particular group of people, mostly women of color. It's the industry that has the largest amount of single moms in it. That has always been scooped out of the deal and told they had to live on their tips and not get whatever the minimum wage hike that was going on. And I'm a mom. I've been a single mom. I've been a waitress. I played a waitress. I've been a waitress. And it's just, they're your brand ambassadors. They're so important. And it's just so unfair. So, I had a space and I went to Albany and I was happy to sit with everyone and to try to support this bill that's coming up for a vote in June and meet the people who had, introduced the bill and stand with them and try to get a chance, just like you're doing now, to tell people what's been going on with these workers who are also incredibly harassed in terms of a job. They get a lot of harassment and they're kind of stuck because they need the job. And so they need to be paid more. It's only what's fair. One fair wage. Yes.
And so you were arrested. What made you, how did that transpire?
Well, I already knew ahead of time that during the action, if it came time to be arrested, that I would. And so we were blocking an entrance, but they were very clever. They knew when the bus left that brought the bulk of people. And so they were trying to wait us out so that fewer people could be arrested. So I went to the head of the line. I used my celebrity to be one of the first arrested. And they were very civil. I don't think the Proud Boys really cared whether or not waitresses were getting a wage, or they didn't know about it or whatever. But we had no violence. It was peaceful. And we just blocked an entranceway and joined hands and then held a banner to try to be a little bit stronger. And actually the guy that was reading me, before they pick you up, before they take you to be booked, they tell you, they give you a chance to leave. They'd say, if you don't get out now, then you're arrested. And he was so flustered, this young guy. I just found myself telling him, it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be all right. And then later I was talking to the gal who was in charge of everything, who was booking. There were 3 of us at a time in her office. She said, well, we're just so tired. There's a lot of demonstrations these days in Albany. And, and I explained to her why we were there and what was going on. And I said, you can be part of this. You're not the enemy. You can be part of this. Of course, you have to do your job. But we're just trying to get the word out, because this isn't a sexy issue that people are talking about on major. It's not going to get a push on CNN or MSNBC or Fox, So actually, you're part of what's helping us do this. And I kind of like that idea that, even though they have to arrest you, that they're in fact part of the process to make people understand what's happening.
Tell us about your experience as a waitress.
That's one of those jobs that you take. I was living at home the first time that I waitressed. I was pretty young. And I never could be a cocktail waitress, though, because I never could remember I always screwed up the oranges and the onions I just never really learned how to make a good cocktail. So that part of it was out for me. So I really was just serving food, which I think is maybe easier than when liquor's involved, because of course sometimes people get crazy. But as one of the owners of Spin, my ping pong thing, that club/restaurant, it was very difficult to try to get whoever was in charge of the clubs to understand, because Spin is kind of part hospitality and part nightclub. And honestly, people just assume that if you're in a nightclub, everyone's an asshole. And so they treat the girls badly. And I kept saying, involve them in the process. Have them tell us what we need. Have them tell us what to do differently, because they are the ambassador of your brand. And that's when I first started, hands-on with the gals and talking to them and really having a relationship. I'm not really part of Spin anymore, but so I don't know what's going on now. But it was a hands-on experience, both sides I've been on. So and I understand that there's a prejudice against women that still exists in these, for a lot of people in the restaurant industry, that still exists. They treat women differently than they would men.
Jennifer, we're going to bring you in. Jenny, tell us how you got involved in One Fair Wage.
Yeah, so I was a former bartender. I started during the pandemic, July of 2021. I lost my job. So I was dependent on that while I waited for unemployment. And I was getting paid $5 an hour. It was completely subminimum wage. So I was entirely dependent on tips. But by that point, that was my only option for work. I had just come out of college. They weren't really hiring. So, I did that. Yeah, so I became an organizer for Our Revolution of February 2022. And I was a part-time bartender by then. And then, I found out about One Fair Wage, in which I didn't even know subminimum wage was a thing. Like, you know what I mean? I just felt like as bartenders, that's what we make. We just depended entirely on tips. But that's also not fair. I didn't have protections at all. I didn't have health care. If it was entirely on my paycheck, I would have gone home with like $200 a week. That's not even enough for utilities and food in New York City. I stopped bartending a month ago, and I'm actually suing the person that I worked with for because I'm still owed tips. So we're getting together, 8 of us, and we're suing. So we're going to start that battle now.
What other stories are important, do you think, for people to know, either your stories or stories of other people you've worked with, to shed light on why this is such an important issue?
I think it's very important because in New York City, people think glamour is like high-end restaurants. The reality is, I was working at a dive bar. There are so many dive bars and small bars and restaurants in New York City that folks are making some minimum wage. That's a reality. I spoke to so many bartenders in service. I made a lot of friends and allies. I've introduced since to One Fair Wage, which they didn't even think, I was educating them because they don't even know about it. I think we need to just, get the word out for as many people.
Saru, let's bring you in too. Saru, is there anything you want to add to this part?
Well, I just think that everything that Susan and Jenny have described, people have to understand has been horrible for 150 years since this whole practice was created at emancipation, as Susan said, for mostly women of color, single moms. But it got just so much worse with the pandemic. I mean, I'm sure Jenny can speak to this, but during the pandemic, so many workers reported tips went way down because sales went down. Harassment went way up. As Susan said, this is the industry with the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry because it's mostly women and moms having to put up with so much to get those tips from customers. During the pandemic, that harassment reached a whole new level. We heard from so many women. I'm regularly asked, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much I want to tip you. We heard that so frequently. We published a report with 600 comments women sent in that they had heard from customers along those lines. And we ended up calling it masculine harassment because it was so pervasive. And it really, frankly, to me, it outed what we always knew, but most people don't know, which is that, we think tipping in the US is entirely based on the quality of service, whether the person is a good server or not. If you hear customers say, take off your mask so I know how much to tip you, that's not based on how good of a server she is. It's based on whether they like your look, your face, your body. And you're essentially selling yourself to get those tips. It makes you so vulnerable to the biases and harassment of customers. And so if we are committed as New York State, or frankly as a country, to any kind of equity, any kind of fairness, then, your ability to feed your children should not be based on whether a man likes your face. It should be based on how good of a service you perform on the job.
Jenny, what kind of experiences did you have that made you realize how important One Fair Wage is?
Well, just like what Saru was saying about having masks on, I used to get harassed constantly on the regular. I think it made me so much more resilient being a bartender because this is on a daily basis. I'm being harassed by men. Oh, you're not being nice enough. Oh, why are you so stressed out? I'm I have so many, you know what I mean? So this is Saru was saying, it's such a reality. It's not just studies, like it is a reality. Like I was a worker and I was facing these things. And I went in during the pandemic, so my tips were low from the beginning, so I didn't even get to see pre-pandemic versus, post-pandemic.
And where are you on your way to right now?
I'm going to a Queens event. We're having a one fair wage event in Queens to honor mothers for Mother's Day. As you know, we were left behind from the $17 increase in minimum wage that just passed. So we're doing one last push, trying to, get the word out. Actually have like a big sign that we brought in for the Albany. And yeah, we're going to be joined by Assemblywoman Jessica Rojas.
Susan, what else have you learned from participating in this?
Well, I definitely hadn't really thought about the history. I didn't understand that this has been going on every single chance that the restaurant lobby gets in there, that they've managed to buy everybody. So I didn't understand that. I knew that the minimum wage itself was a problem, working for Bernie, going around and talking about raising the minimum wage, which now should be raised even more than $15. I heard stories then, but I didn't understand that this industry, that these women, that these people were specifically denied every single time there was a step forward. I didn't really know that. I certainly knew how essential this service has always been, but I didn't know that there was a history of picking on that, even when all, car parkers or whatever they're called, valets, and all these people were getting booed up, that they had somehow managed, that everybody agreed to just cut women out, to just cut waitresses out. That was really shocking to me. So that's why I think it's important, and I thank you for doing this, for people to understand. And, when you talk about waitresses in Europe not getting tipped that much, they have health care. They have a higher minimum wage. So it's a completely different scenario, and they're less stressed. So they can, they have a good shot at doing their job well without that kind of stress to put up with harassment and everything. So people don't understand that too when they say, oh, we don't have to tip that much here. Yeah, there's a reason, because that's a country, like most free countries, that has a safety net for people and a high minimum wage.
It's crazy that this population keeps getting left out, because they're not a tiny population. In fact, they are the largest workforce of minimum wage workers. So basically, every time the minimum wage goes up, we exclude the largest workforce of minimum wage workers at the federal level, at the state level, and certainly the largest employer of minimum wage women, certainly the largest employer of immigrants, people of color, as we said, single mothers. And there's a reason for it. It is an entity called the National Restaurant Association. It wields enormous power in both the New York State Legislature and Congress. Unfortunately, at the moment, even our governor is married to a vice president of a major national restaurant corporation that is a leader in the Restaurant Association. So the relationships between elected officials and the Restaurant Association is just, unfortunately, so entrenched that it becomes very hard to move these issues. And it's important to note, actually, we just released new information today. So earlier this year, we had worked with the New York Times to expose the fact that over the last 2 decades, the Restaurant Association has doubled its lobbying dollars. And we had always thought that was because restaurants like IHOP and Denny's and Applebee's were giving more money to the Restaurant Association to fight us. Turns out, 2018, we found out, no, in fact, they had created a scheme where they had created a wholly owned company called ServSafe to do food safety training. And they had gone around to states and made workers pay for this training, and then used this money from workers to then lobby against those same workers' wage increases without these workers knowing about it. So there are a lot of bad lobbies out there, oil and gas and Walmart. I mean, there's a lot of bad lobbies out there. This is a lobby that reached a whole nother level of sadistic genius. They figured out how to get the very low wage workers they're lobbying against to pay for their lobbying efforts.
So disgusting. Wow.
On
So
top of
dark.
that,